Aether is a term that's thrown around a lot in Final Fantasy XIV, and its use so often in so many situations, it can be hard to get an understanding of what Aether is and how it interacts with the inhabitants and environments of the game's world. Is it magic? Is it life energy? Is it both? Hello, I'm the Exarch, and in today's video, we'll be breaking down and discussing the fundamental concept of Aether. Aether is, in essence, both magical energy and life energy wrapped up into one package. It naturally flows through both people and the entire planet of Hydaelyn, and, barring outside influences, this generally trends towards an equilibrium that is necessary to maintain a normal environment and healthy individuals. When there is an abundance of Aether in the environment, it can manifest in the form of Aether crystals. These are those giant crystals you see around places with high concentrations of Aether, like Mordona. Both these crystals, and Aether in general, can be unaspected, or take on a particular elemental aspect. There are 6 of these aspects: fire, wind, lightning, ice, water, and earth. These aspects can be further divided into 2 categories: active and passive, or astral and umbral. Fire, wind, and lightning are all astral aspects, and ice, water, and earth are their umbral counterparts. I say counterparts because each pair is related in some way, but is either literally or thematically opposed. For instance, both wind and water are fluids that are found in abundance. However, water, being umbral, can exist in a static state, like a lake or a pond with slow or no movement. On the flip side, wind is the state of air while it is in motion, and therefore can only exist in an active state, hence its astral status. Likewise, fire and ice and earth and lightning have similar relationships. Fire causes an abundance of heat, whereas ice can only form in the absence of heat, and lightning exists as a high-energy plasma, whereas earth is a low-energy solid. These 6 elemental aspects also interact with each other, forming 2 distinct triangles of strength and weakness. These are essentially rock, paper, scissors style relationships where any given element has 1 strength and 1 weakness. For instance, fire is beaten by wind and strong against ice, and ice is strong against wind but is beaten by fire. These 2 triangles make up the primary elemental chart for Aether. Also, an element is naturally resistant to itself, so lore-wise, Garuda would be resistant to wind-aspected attacks. In-game, the relationship between these elements only really come into play a few times in the early story, like when you have to use a corrupted ice-aspected crystal to allow the Enterprise to fly through Garuda's wind-aspected barrier, or when the Scions stuffed a bunch of lightning-aspected crystals onto 2 boats to do the same to Leviathan. It also comes into play in Eureka, with the elemental chart and elemental creatures. My guess is the limited role of elemental relationships in actual gameplay is mostly down to balance issues. Most classes in the game have a limited access to elemental moves. Imagine if you were a black mage going up against a fire-aspected raid boss. Your strongest spells would be resisted, and you'd lose a lot of DPS. Unlike a single-player Final Fantasy game, where the player has control over their entire party and which spells and attacks are used, Final Fantasy XIV has the added goals of making sure each job is viable in all content, and that any proper team composition can clear any content without worrying about what job they are. Because of these reasons, among others, elemental strengths and resistances are largely ignored in actual gameplay. As a quick side note, there were elemental resistance stats and materia in early versions of the game, but those were largely ignored, and were removed completely in 4.0. There are also 2 additional aspects that I haven't gone over yet: light and darkness. We know Aether can be either light or dark aspected, but neither of these exist on the chart. It could be simply that light and dark don't interact with the other elements, so are excluded, or it's possible that they're simply not considered elemental aspects and are in a whole different category. At the very least, they're still considered to fall under the categories of astral and umbral, referring to light and darkness respectively. At least in the source, but more on that later. Aether that's not solidified into crystals or infused in an object or person exists in a separate, ethereal realm from the rest of the world. Aether can cross over naturally from one realm to another, but there's a limit to how much Aether can cross over at once. When a large amount of stored Aether is released into the surrounding world, only some of it can cross over. The rest can soak the area in an abundance of Aether and lead to the formation of Aether crystals and other anomalies. Because people contain Aether as a fundamental component of their life force, large, bloody battles where there's an extreme loss of life can soak the land in excess Aether. This is actually what Eric, the wordy scholar from the Monk questline, is investigating with that special machine of his. Aether can be used for a large variety of things, from powering machines to channeling magic, and even summoning Primals. All the magic classes in the game use Aether as the basis for their spells in one way or another. Thaumaturges use their own Aether to fuel fire spells, then shift to ice spells to increase their own Aether recovery. Black mages use an active Astral Fire stance to expend their stored Aether, and then switch to a passive Umbral Ice stance to gather Aether from their surroundings and store it within themselves. Arcanists use arcane geometries to manipulate the Aether to perform certain effects, and create pacts with familiars to help them attack. Summoners also use arcane geometries, but they also use leftover Aether from encounters with Primals to form Eggies to help fight for them. Red mages mostly rely on the Aether within themselves, performing both white and black magic spells to build up stores of Aether in their bodies, then unleashing those stores in augmented melee attacks. Scholars, like Arcanists and Summoners, also use arcane geometries, and form pacts with healing fairies to heal and shield their allies. Conjurers and white mages both draw Aether from nature to cast both their healing and offensive spells. And last but not least, astrologians attune their personal Aether to match the Aether of celestial formations with the help of their cards, to divine fate and to support and heal their allies. Most of the other jobs also channel Aether, either to cast spells, enhance their weapon skills, or grant effects to themselves or the rest of the party. Paladin and Dark Knight both use light and dark magic respectively as part of their kit. Ninjas and ninjutsu are explicitly stated to be spells. Monks' chakras affect the way Aether flows through their body. Bard has their songs, and Foe's Requiem directly consumes MP. Machinists use an Aethero-transformer to convert Aether into bullets. Dancer has their Esprit abilities. And the version of Gunbreaker, the Warrior of Light becomes, also explicitly uses Aether for their charges. When it comes to the physical weapon skills, however, it can be kind of hard to determine which ones require the user to channel Aether, and which ones are just good old-fashioned physical combat. This line gets even more blurred when Garleans come into play. See, full-blooded Garleans cannot channel Aether at all, meaning that, outside of Magitech, they cannot use Aether to enhance their weapon skills. However, we do see full-blooded Garleans using skills not unlike those of the Warrior of Light. Also, after Thancred becomes unable to use Aether, after the events immediately preceding Heaven's Ward, he's still able to use most of his skills and duties when you fight alongside of him. And he definitely didn't have access to Magitech. Still, I think it's likely that, even though some of the skills might not require Aether, in the context of the Warrior of Light and other skilled fighters, I think it's likely that they use Aether to augment their abilities, and I do believe higher level skills would be impossible to perform without it. Keep in mind, this was just a brief overview of how each of the jobs in the game use Aether. Since I'll be going over each individual job in their own video, I won't go into any more detail here, but I definitely glossed over some things. In addition to powering magic, Aether is also used as a form of transportation via Aetherites. The Aetherites are crystal formations that form in locations where the Lifestream comes very close to surfacing in the physical realm. Teleportation using these crystals allows people to enter the Lifestream and, merely by focusing on a destination, emerge at another Aetherite. Without the crystals, it would be incredibly hard to navigate the Lifestream, and you'd most likely wind up getting lost and rejoining the Lifestream, which effectively kills you. Even if you don't get lost and die, unfacilitated travel through the Lifestream can cause irreversible side effects, like what happened when Y'shtola and Thancred used Y'shtola's spell Flow to escape Ul'dah. Thancred, as mentioned earlier, lost his ability to channel Aether, and Y'shtola herself lost her ability to see. Speaking of the Lifestream, what even is the Lifestream? Well, remember how I said Aether acts as both magical energy and life energy? Well, the Lifestream is basically the part of the ethereal realm that deals with souls. As mentioned earlier, when a person dies, the Aether contained in their body enters the ethereal realm. Well, in specific, it enters the Lifestream. Similarly, the life force needed to sustain a person's life comes from the Lifestream, likely entering them when they're born. Because of this, the process of a person's Aether entering the Lifestream upon death is called rejoining the Lifestream. Aside from magic and teleportation, Aether is also a requirement for summoning Primals. Because Primals are entirely composed of Aether, they not only require a lot of Aether upon being summoned, but they continue to suck the Aether from the lands surrounding them. This is a big problem, because a lack of Aether can cause mass death of plants and animals, and turn a given location into a barren wasteland. If enough of the world's Aether is consumed by Primals, it can cause this on a global scale, potentially bringing about an umbral calamity. This is why Primals are treated as such a big threat by pretty much everyone who isn't a villain with ulterior motives. While too little Aether is a bad thing, too much Aether can also be a problem. Excessive ether can make an area dangerous to living things, because absorbing too much environmental ether can cause ether sickness, which can be fatal. In addition, it can make wildlife naturally more aggressive, and cause harsh weather patterns. As mentioned in my video about the region, Eorzea has a higher concentration of ether than the other continents, making it more dangerous, but also a haven for adventurers, and a great place to summon primals. In that video, I mentioned that Eorzea has such a high concentration of ether because Mordona, and more specifically Lake Silvertear, is the nexus of ether for the entire planet. In that video, I mentioned the mythology behind it, but the real reason that Lake Silvertear is the nexus of ether for the planet is unknown. My speculation is that Lake Silvertear is just where the ethereal realm as a whole is closest to crossing over into the physical realm, but there's no confirmation of that. And here's the part of the video where we cross over from non-spoiler territory to where I talk about stuff revealed in Shadowbringers. So, if you don't want to be spoiled, here's your chance to click away. In Shadowbringers, we learn a lot of interesting things about the nature of ether. Remember how I said that light and dark were considered astral and umbral in the source specifically? Well, not so in the first. Light is considered umbral, and darkness is considered astral. This actually makes a lot of sense considering the effects of light-aspected ether. Light-aspected ether causes stagnation, which is definitely an umbral effect. This is also why a flood of light-aspected ether from the destruction and rejoining of the first causes Black Rose, which kills by the stagnation of ether in its targets, to go out of control and basically wipe out much of Eorzea. The reveal that light equals umbral, therefore stagnation, has some pretty serious implications given that Hydaelyn is light-aspected. Still, there are far more hints dropped in Shadowbringers confirming that, despite Hydaelyn's origins as a primal that split the world into 14 fragments, she was brought about by a desire to protect the remaining life in the wake of Zodiark summoning. And she did purposely protect the first via Minfilia. Not to sound like a Hydaelyn apologist here, but I'm pretty sure she's not going to turn out to be the bad guy after all this time. In addition, I would like to mention a few things about the 6th Umbral Calamity. The Calamity was a great flood caused by a lack of ether due to the War of the Magi draining it from the planet with excessive use of white and black magic. Given what we learn about each of the Umbral Calamities, we know that the 6th Umbral Calamity was caused by a reflection of the source becoming overwhelmed with water-aspected ether and collapsing, thus rejoining with the source and flooding it with the same water-aspected ether. Now, white and black magic can both be dangerous if used excessively, much like how Black Rose would have been a threat on its own, even without the collapse of the first. I have a feeling that, much like how the effects of Black Rose were amplified by the collapse of a reflection, that the ether-draining effects of excessive black and white magic use probably wouldn't have caused as huge of a disaster without the collapse of the water-aspected reflection. Also, chances are, our friends the Ascians likely manipulated things behind the scenes to provoke the War of the Magi and cause the whole situation in the first place. I think if white and black magic were still largely practiced in present days, there'd be much less of a risk as long as it wasn't being taught to everyone. Also, as an interesting side note regarding the first, the eponymous lake of Lakeland is named the Source. This is super confusing, because the Source can also refer to, well, the world of the Source. However, I don't believe the lake of the Source and the world of the Source have any connection to one another. Instead, I think it's likely that, much like how Lake Silvertear is the nexus of all ether on Hydaelyn, I think that the Source refers to the source of all ether, as in, the nexus of all ether on the world of the first. As a side note, this is hilarious because if you were to tell people in Norvrent you were from the Source, they would all think you meant the lake, so they would literally assume you were telling them you came out of a lake instead of from an entirely different world. And I think that pretty much wraps us up about Aether. There might be some minute details I left out or missed, and I definitely glossed over some details. But I tried to be as thorough as possible, and most of the details in relation to things like the various jobs or primals can be elaborated on in their own videos. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Before we end, I did want to make a special announcement. In the last lore video, I said that my schedule was pretty hectic, and I didn't have as much time to work on these videos as I did originally. Now, my schedule still probably won't allow me to make more than one of these videos a month, but due to some life changes, my schedule is a lot more flexible, and I do have a bit more free time. So, I'm planning on streaming Final Fantasy XIV content on Twitch on a regular basis, at least once a week. Right now, my designated stream day is Saturday at 8 PM Eastern Standard Time. If I have the time, I might also pick a random weeknight to stream, but that would be less consistent. Because of that, I figured it would be a good idea to set up a place where I could announce my streams. So, I've set up a Twitter account for the purpose of stream announcements, video updates, and general lore discussion. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/SaldExarch, and you can follow me on Twitter at TheSaldExarch. Also, I normally don't ask this at the end of my videos, but I am trying to grow my channel, so please be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and feel free to share with people you think might enjoy this kind of Final Fantasy XIV lore content. My channel is relatively new, and this topic can be a bit of a niche, so I definitely appreciate all the help I can get in terms of spreading this around. Once again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.